All right, we're starting the broadcast in 5, 4.
Hello, everyone. This is Alan Shimel, Editor-in-Chief of DevOps.com, and welcome to another DevOps.com webinar. Today's webinar is sponsored by our friends at Electric Cloud. The title of today's webinar is Diving Deeper into DevOps Deployments, and we have what I consider not just an all-star panel, but a Hall of Fame panel. And we have my friend Gene Kim, renowned author, CTO, and most importantly, researcher.
Hello, Alan. How are you doing?
Good, Gene. Good to hear from you. Good, nice to have you on.
Likewise.
But not to be outdone, we also have the CTO of Electric Cloud and another good friend of mine who always has great commentary and smart things to say, Anders Wallgren. Anders, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, as always.
Thank you. Hey, before we get started, guys, I just wanted to take a moment for our audience to let them know that we have set aside time at the end of today's webinar to answer questions. As a matter of fact, some of you have already submitted questions via email, and we'll queue them right up. But we also have a section in our GoToWebinar control panel where you can ask your questions, write your questions in real time. You don't have to worry about forgetting them. They'll be queued, and we'll be able to go over them and get them to our panel at the appropriate time in today's presentation. So we encourage you, please use the question section. Put your questions in. Both Gene and Anders love to hear from the audience. Not the chat section, though. For our webinars, we use chat if you have any sort of audio or video difficulties, but chat's still working. We do have engineers standing by who can help you. So if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, let us know on chat and we'll work with that. That being said, we also have a very special promotion we're running today, courtesy of Electric Cloud and of IT Revolution, Gene's company, and that is we are raffling off 20 copies of the DevOps Handbook. And in order to win one of these copies, you're going to need to go on Twitter and tweet about this webinar in real time. And I believe the hashtag that you have to use is DevOps Dive, because it is a deep dive today. So hashtag DevOps Dive, and if I got that wrong, I'm sure someone will correct me in the background, but it's hashtag DevOps Dive. And if we see it out there in Twitter, we'll contact you and you could win a free copy of the DevOps Handbook, the companion to the Phoenix Project. And it's a great book if you haven't already read it. Anyway, with that out of the way, let me turn things over to Anders, and him and Gene will take over from here. Anders?
Yeah, I'm just going to do a little quick kind of agenda overview here. We're going to have Gene talk first about the business value of DevOps and some of the findings that we have from the most recent DevOps Enterprise Summit conference last November. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about deployment automation and also some of the tips that we have for everyone to kind of avoid the deployment anxiety that I think we all suffer to from some degree. Before that, I believe we have a polling question. So, Alan,
yes,
do you want to take it away?
Yes, we do. Thank you. So our our only polling question today, Jules, if we can pop it. Well, it's one of two questions. And our polling question is, how do you currently handle your deployments? And we're going to ask you to select one of the following. Totally manual, 100% manual. Mostly manual, but you're starting to automate some. Mostly automated, but still manual. 100% automated, and that's fantastic. Or I don't handle deployments at all, and I don't really care about the question. But guys, feedback and interactivity is what makes these webinars fun. Excuse me. So please give us an answer. We're going to close off voting in just another 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Jules, if we can have our answers, please. Anders, Gene, pretty much what you expected here?
Yeah, from my perspective, I mean, I think we see, very few of us are 100% automated yet. It is, it's some work to get there, that's for sure. But it's encouraging that I see the numbers growing. I think it's encouraging to see that. I don't know what you think, Gene.
Yep, it's a nice Gaussian bell curve. In fact, we can talk about more about why we would want automated deployments, among other things. So let me share with you sort of the top findings over research that I've done with Jez Humble. So he's a continuous, he's a co-author of the Continuous Delivery book, co-author of the DevOps Handbook. We worked with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Puppet over the years. Benchmark now, I think it's over 28,000 respondents. And the finding really is the business value of adopting DevOps principles and patterns is even larger than we thought. So on the next slide, I'm going to share with you sort of the headliner numbers. What we found for now 4 years running is that the high performers are massively outperforming their non-high performing peers, and they're far more agile. They have higher throughput. They're doing 200 times more frequent deployments. That could be deployments of code or deployments of changes in the environment. And more importantly, they can complete those changes 2,500 times more quickly. So in other words, how quickly can we go from a change being introduced into version control through tests, through deployment, so it's actually running in production, and where customers are actually getting value. So high performers will do that in minutes or worst case hours, whereas lower performers might require weeks, months, or even quarters. So on the next slide, we show the opposite dimension. So they're not only getting more work done, but they have better outcomes. When they do a production deployment, they're 3 times more likely to succeed without causing a step 1 outage, a service impairment, a security breach, or a compliance failure. And when something goes wrong, they can resolve those issues 24 times more quickly. In other words, how the mean time to restore service is 24 times faster. So it really shows that to be reliable, we have to do smaller deployments more frequently. And this confirms our common experience is that in general, the larger the size of our deployments, the more things that go wrong, the bigger the outage, and the more time it takes to restore. So on the next slide, we show that there's another dimension of quality, that if we are integrating information security objectives into everyone's daily work, the outcome is that we spend 1/2 the amount of time remediating security issues. So when you build security and quality in, you end up with having to spend a lot less time fixing things on the back end. And another way to express that is that we found high performers are controlling unplanned work. And by doing that, they're able to deploy nearly 1/3 more time on planned work. So that's more strategic activities than the tactical activities associated with firefighting. So that's IT performance. On the next slide, I just have 2 slides on organizational performance. So not only do high performers have better measures around DevOps and information security, they're twice as likely to exceed profitability, market share, and productivity goals. And we found for those nearly 1,000 organizations that gave us a stock ticker symbol that they have 50% higher market cap growth over 3 years. So, we found this other great dimension of along organizational performance last year, and that's on the next slide. We found that employees in high-performing organizations are 2.2 times more likely. On the next slide, they're 2.2 times more likely to recommend to their friends their organizations as a great place to work. So Anders, if you can, I still see slide 9.
Yeah, sorry, Gene, I'm hitting the button. We'll get there in a second.
so that number.
I'm deploying your slides.
Our next polling question is: how many of you automate slides moving on a webinar?
We don't want that automated. We don't want our approval. Yeah. So so this is the employee net promoter score measure. So and what's great is that is you can consider that a proxy for retention, ability to hire and retain great talent, and a proxy for a lot of the culture surveys that are tied into executive compensation. So, just to wrap up this section, it turns out there's actually one question that you can ask that predicts almost all of IT performance, organizational performance, and all of the technical practices that come out of it. And that is this one question on the next slide, which is on a scale of 1 to 7, to what degree do we fear doing deployments? So 1 is we have no fear at all. We do it all the time. 7 is existential fear, and that's why we do it never. So why don't we actually put that polling question out there? Jules, should I turn it over to you? Just to read it again, it's on a scale of 1 to 7. To what degree does your organization fear doing deployments? I'm on the polling question on slide. Yeah, there we go.
Yep, here we go.
Okay. Scale 1 to 5.
So on a scale of 1 to 5, how fearful are you of deployments? 1 being no fear at all, fearless. 5 being, oh my God, it's the end of the world. And again, guys, you know, it's always
Alan,
good if you participate.
Anders, I mean, does that resonate with you in terms of the startling effectiveness of how much we fear doing deployments and IT performance and organizational performance?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think we've seen some pretty interesting behaviors in people. I mean, there's almost physical fear sometimes. You know, when you go into a deployment cycle, if you're not automated and you have to do everything manual, and you know, you've got the $1 million conference call going with 42 people on it, and you know, God forbid that you type, you know, reboot into the wrong X term and, you know, reboot the load balancer instead of the, you know, your app server or something like that. It's real. It's definitely real that people fear doing these things. And again, you know, as you pointed out so well, the less often you do it, the more painful it is. You need to do it more often and with smaller batch sizes. That's absolutely something that we see out there.
That's awesome. By the way, the $1 million phone call, I love that. 42 people. How do you get to $1 million?
Yeah, they're not very well paid, obviously, if it's only $1 million with 42 people. But
no, I've heard that anecdote before, and I always try to reconstruct what that calculation is. It's you can tie up
well,
$1 million.
You know, if you figure that you've got 40 or 50 people on the phone for 6 or 7 hours. You're probably paying a good chunk of that to whatever your conference phone vendor is.
Yeah.
But then if you've got a problem, you know, how do you diagnose a problem when everybody's on the phone and everybody has their own, you know, X terminal running and are doing their own little piece of it, right? It's like everybody's looking at their own little piece of the elephant, and they have no way of knowing what's going on. So the real dread and the fear isn't necessarily the doing of it. It's what do you do when it goes wrong, and how do you track down the problem?
That's awesome.
When the money starts to flow.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the observation is that one question predicts performance, as well as, you know, all the behaviors and practices that enable safe deployments. You know, small batch sizes, version control, automated deployments, stable environments that are all consistent, you know, throughout the higher and lower environments, and proactive production telemetry and so forth. So, with that, tell us about what some of these practices are, Anders.
Happy to. So I think you know, as we've talked about before, and certainly as the State of DevOps report you know, has been talking about for years now. I'm going to actually skip forward a little bit because I'm going to cover these things in more detail in a slide here, if you give me a second. But I think one of the really cool things about you know, what we've been doing recently is we've been hearing, you know, great stories at the DevOps Enterprise Summit. You know, I think the tagline here, you know, DevOps is for the unicorns, but also the horses. And you know, the summit really is, you know, it really is for all the horses, and all of the people that we're hearing from in those, and then that you've been hearing from too, Gene, in the conferences are just, you know, outstanding.
Oh, Anders, do you want me to talk about? Yeah, do you want me to tell about the DevOps being for unicorns and horses? Okay, yeah. So yeah, I think one of the things that Anders, you and I have talked about for many years, and was the reason why we have worked on the DevOps Enterprise Summit together, was this kind of mistaken assumption that, you know, you can only do this if you're at Facebook or Google or Amazon or Netflix and so forth. And so the purpose of the DevOps Enterprise Summit was really to showcase large, complex organizations that have been around for decades or centuries. And since then, Electric Lab has been an amazing partner in making that event happen. And so over the years, we've heard from over 200 leaders, and the presentation we asked them to give is a 30-minute experience report. You know, specifically, tell us about your industry that you compete in. Tell us about your organization. Where do you fit on the org chart? What business problem did you set out to solve? What did you do? What were your outcomes, and what did you learn? And I think we have, over the years, almost every some of the largest brands in every industry vertical represented. So I'm going to share with you some of my top surprises in terms of like these proof points that show that it is absolutely possible for these organizations to replicate the performance that we've seen in the Google's, Amazon, Facebook. So here are some of my favorites. One is Heather Mickman, Senior Director of Engineering at Target for many years, and she described that they're doing lots of DevOps-like things. But why don't you just freeze that for a second? So they're doing many deployments, but what are they doing DevOps on? The business problem they set out to solve was that every time a dev team wanted to get access to systems of record, they would often have to wait 6 to 9 months because everything was tightly coupled point to point. And so they put every product catalog, store information, shipments, cross shipments, all into a next generation system of record. But more importantly, they had versioned APIs. So any dev team could add, change, remove that data on demand. So that she went on record saying that over the years that has enabled 53 different business initiatives. Capital One, Topo Powell, described how they created an internal shared service that includes deployment automation that enables dev teams to safely deploy hundreds of times per day with lead time not measured in months but in minutes. Gary Groover 2 years ago described at Macy's how they went from doing 1,500 manual tests every 10 days to now doing hundreds of thousands of automated tests daily. In the next build, Jason Cox, over the years, we've heard how he's embedded, hundreds of ops engineers into the dev teams across the Disney enterprise in the lines of business, helping those teams be as productive as if they were at a Google, Amazon, Netflix, or Facebook. Carmen Diardo talks about how they did it not for a peripheral satellite application, but in the core, the state pension retirements application. This is a 40-year-old COBOL mainframe app. Terry Potts at Raytheon described how they reduced testing and certification time for satellites from months down to a day. And so all of these, I think, give us confidence that the DevOps principle and patterns are universal, that they transcend the technology stack we actually run on. And so, and just to sum up on this, I think where the value will be created in DevOps is not the unicorns. It is really about elevating the state of the practice so that every of the 8 million developers, 8 million ops people, that they're as productive as if they were at a Google, Amazon, or Facebook. So, that is where trillions of dollars of economic value will be created. Anders, does that resonate with you?
Oh my goodness, yes. I think we a couple of years ago, or maybe a little bit longer, we kind of struggled with the idea of, talking to customers and telling them that, listen, this DevOps thing, it's for you. I know you're not a hot, new web property. You're not the latest Instagram or whatever the app of the day is. And everybody kind of thought, look, we have legacy systems. We have lots of different applications that it can't possibly work for us. And I think one of the most awesome things about the conference is you get a lot of people there where I think everybody a few years ago would have said it can't possibly work for them. The U.S. government doing DevOps, give me a break. But it turns out, hey, look, if you do it right, it works. And maybe you're not doing deployments every 12 seconds if you're a hardware vendor and you're putting software onto hardware devices, but you better be able to. If you're not able to choose when you ship, when you deploy, you've got some work to do, and it doesn't really matter how your customers access your software. Whether it's a web browser or a device or a car or IoT device or what have you. It's really the key part is, do you have control over your process? Is it repeatable? Is it reliable? All of those kinds of things. The final container or vessel for your wonderful new code is really somewhat irrelevant. There might be some technology things that we got to do to make that work, but it's really just all about getting control of your process and having having some say in how things work, as opposed to being at the mercy of whatever problems you have in your software pipeline.
Hey guys, this is Alan. If I may ask a question of both of you, taking this whole horses, unicorns theory. So yes, DevOps definitely was big at the unicorns, but Gene and Anders, it seems like we're almost seeing more innovation happening down at the horses these days. And maybe it's because of these greater numbers, and with greater numbers you have more experimentation. But Gene, especially you speak to so many different folks. Is it true? It's almost like a Cambrian explosion, if you will, in terms of innovation at the horse's level? Yes, no, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what we're observing is, you have organizations like Capital One, Starbucks, Target, saying Nationwide Insurance, they're saying in order for us to win in the marketplace, we need to build a world-class technology organization. And suddenly they're doing everything that Netflix, Google, Facebook have done, right? They're speaking at every conference and they're sharing their stories, far and wide. They're open sourcing projects. And that's what it takes to retain and hire great talent. So, if you take the total population of engineers at Google, Amazon, Facebook, I mean, I think it's only probably 1% of the total population of engineers. There's no doubt in my mind that, for every, if we can elevate the state of the practice for the 100, the 99% who aren't at those organizations, so that they're achieving the same outcomes, it's obvious to me that, the innovations there will become a point where the lines cross and more innovation will be happening in the large brands than just the Google, Amazon, Facebook. I mean, Anders, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, certainly, having new kind of technologies come out like containers and, ways to manage those things and automation for all of the public cloud systems that are out there, helps a lot. But I think really it's the groundswell, the Cambrian explosion, as Alan put it, of just people realize that it doesn't have to be this bad. My job doesn't have to suck this much. I don't have to work every weekend doing, manual deployments or dealing with, rollbacks or problems with snowflake environments and all of those kinds of things. And I think it's kind of an expectation changer. People are starting to have the expectation. I may work for 10 different companies in my professional career, or maybe it's 20 or maybe it's 5, but if I go from one to the other, I'm going to have an expectation that they're kind of sane and progressive about how they do software development, and in particular how they operate the release and deployment process. So I think it's a good kind of virus that's been started in the industry, that we're setting higher expectations for ourselves, and then also working together as a community to help achieve them. I think that's really it's just fascinating and exciting to see.
Got it.
So with that, I'm going to dive in a little bit and kind of talk about deployment automation and some of those things. And here's kind of an interesting set of numbers based on a survey that we've done in the past. And I would say these pretty much mirror. The categories are a little bit different than our polling question, but pretty much mirrors what we saw, which is we've got very few organizations out there that have gotten to the point where things are fully automated. To where the classic example that I always ask organizations that I talk to is you're on the eve of your production deployment of your wonderful new life-changing, world-changing application, and you find a critical bug that you have to fix before you release. And let's, for the sake of argument, say that it's a one-liner fix in the code. It takes 2 minutes for the engineer to make the fix and check it in. How long does it take until you're back where you were with confidence about to release your product? And the shocking thing is sometimes how few organizations actually know the answer to that question. Is that hours? Is it minutes? Is it weeks? And really only by starting to unfold the layers in that onion can you discover and get control over your process. I think the very first thing we need to do is understand before we automate. And so I think a lot of times when we see fully automatic deployments or fully manual deployments or fully manual software pipelines, really what we're dealing with is a lack of kind of system understanding across the entire pipeline. And oftentimes that's because there are different organizations in charge of different stages of the pipeline. We've got our development silos and our QA silos and our build and release silos and our ops silos and those kinds of things. And really only by starting to work across those are we going to be able to successfully kind of get across the deployment threshold and get over some of those anxieties that we have. And if we're doing manual deployments, there's a lot of challenges that you run into and a lot of time wasted. And Gene just showed us the quantity of time that's wasted if we don't have for example, fully automated deployments or the ability to do rapid deployments. The high performers are spending 29% more time on actual work as opposed to rework and problem solving and those kinds of things. That's a significant amount, right? And that's the really stunning thing about the numbers that have come across in the State of DevOps report over the years is, we're not measuring things in percent anymore, right? We're measuring them mostly in X. 2,500X, 24X, but even a 29%, increase in the amount of time that we can spend on real work is huge. And so when we don't, Gene.
Oh yeah, I mean just to resonate on that, it's one of the big surprises for me, right? Is in the 1980s, Toyota stunned the world by what they call the Toyota paradox. There was this fourfold advantage that Toyota had over the rest of the auto manufacturers. They could generate twice the outputs with one half the inputs. So one half the floor space, one half the inventory, one half the workforce, right? And still had twice the number of cars. So a 4x improvement in performance, stunned everybody. And yet, as you mentioned, these days, we don't see a 4x improvement. We see like a 3 order of magnitude difference between high and low. And so, maybe it's 200 times more frequent deployments, 2,500 times shorter lead times. I mean, it really is breathtaking to see, this decisive advantage that high performers have. And I think, just to the point that you were making, it is breathtaking.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always a great analogy. The car manufacturing, I trot that one out all the time, and it's it's not a perfect one, but boy, I mean, does it resonate with people? I mean, one example I always use is we treat software kind of poorly. If we treated cars the way we treat software, we would be manufacturing a car, we install the radio, and then we park the car in the corner of the factory for 3 weeks before we test to see if the radio works. And nothing happens in those 3 weeks to that car. I mean, if car manufacturers still work that way, they wouldn't be in business. And I think pretty soon that's going to be true for companies that rely on software as well, because the differences here, they are not small. They are massive, and they accrue. Maybe not straight to the bottom line, but eventually they accrue pretty heavily to the bottom line. And they also accrue to the happiness of employees and the satisfaction of customers and all of those kinds of things. So all of the things that we run into when we're doing things like manual deployments, all of the errors that we have and in dealing with configuration drift and what's this environment set up and what's that environment set up, and troubleshooting and dealing with dependencies between large complex applications, and provisioning and not having self-service for these things. So we always have to rely on particular individuals in the organization to get the work done, which then burns those individuals out and makes them not happy. It's all things that we've seen before in other industries, and yet we're kind of having to learn that over in our own software industry. But at least we are learning it. I mean, I think there's definitely progress being made there. So I think, and Gene, I'm pretty sure you'd agree with this, is we can't really put it more simply. If you want to get better at DevOps, if you want to be more into the DevOps groove of things, the biggest bang for your buck is to focus on your deployments. Make those automated, make them less error prone, less manual, less costly, less lengthy, all of those things. And so we've got some tips and some anecdotes and things of things that we've worked with our customers and people in the industry and so forth, to just sort of deal with the deployment anxiety, and which is real. I mean, it really does happen. And just to give you a flavor, these are the horses that are out there. Real companies, legacy companies with large existing applications, large existing infrastructures that are, they may not be turning the entire ship all at once, because, that's just too much to ask, but are definitely, there's definitely a strong foothold for DevOps in all of these organizations. And that's taken a long time to do. But here are some sort of simple things to focus on. One of the things that Gene and the group discovered very early on in their work is that artifact repositories are a really good indicator of whether you have any sort of control over your deployment process. If you're not versioning your binaries, if you don't have the ability to fetch the latest or fetch the previous, or see the origin of where your binaries are coming from and how they were built and all of those kinds of things, you don't have visibility into that. That is a leading indicator of deployment problems. and probably that means you don't do deployments very often. It probably means that you have problems with them, all of those kinds of things. So it's a really kind of important thing to focus on, having a good artifact repository that services you, and that can be challenging. We worked with one large online mortgage company whose name I can't use, but you've probably seen their commercials on TV. One of their challenges was they have multiple data centers that they need to run their deployments into, and they have rather large artifacts that need to be deployed. And one of the things that just took time was to transfer those artifacts out of their build and test infrastructure into their pre-production and production infrastructure. We were able to work with them and with Amazon S3 to use S3 as the backing store for, in this case, for our repository server in our electric flow product, so that we do one upload into the cloud, and then basically it then becomes Amazon's problem to make sure those bits are available all the time, and those kinds of things. So you sometimes have to work with the infrastructure that you're dealing with, and make sure that you use it to the best ability to deal with that. And the same goes, any financial institution, one of the largest banks in the world that we worked with, that was a challenge for them as well, and in spades. 17 different data centers that had to sometimes host deployments of these complex applications, and just moving the artifacts around and making sure that you get the right artifact in the right place at the right time was a challenge. I mean, even with things like replicated file systems, and they had tried everything. They really needed to focus on the binary artifact repository was something that they struggled with, and once they got that put in place, a lot of things started to fall into place, or a lot of things, a lot of problems just kind of stopped happening. And we've certainly seen organizations that will, they'll have the magic shared folder on the network where all the artifacts go, but then you're at the mercy of file systems. Did all the bits make it in there? Is somebody still copying it in there, and am I getting zeros when I copy it down into the, into the production architecture and all of those kinds of things? So artifact repos are your friend. You definitely want to make sure that you have one. Second, automate your deployments. You're going to get sick of me saying automation in this webinar. I apologize ahead of time, but it's just going to happen. Manual deployments, they are scary, but it doesn't need to be like a tightrope walk every time you're going to push into production. If you're doing manual deployments, probably one of the things you suffer from is that when you have failures, they're difficult to diagnose. Somebody ran a command line argument or a command line tool, and 84,000 screenfuls of log file dumped out onto there, and somewhere in there was an error message. Now you've got to go spelunking through that, no pun intended, to figure out, kind of what went wrong. Typically, when people automate their deployments, you're also automating the diagnosis of problems in those deployments. You can't always rely on just the exit code of a command line tool to tell you whether something went right or went wrong. You probably, once you do that, kind of the actual moving of the bits into the infrastructure, you probably also want to do some testing. Or you might want to be doing it as a blue-green deployment or a partial deployment, those kinds of things. And if you don't have automation behind that, it's very difficult to move fast. We find very often that in order to get deployments done, you need heroic efforts by individuals, right? And very high-stress kind of tightrope walk in the environments where, downtime is expensive. Downtime is measured in lots and lots and lots of dollars, euros, and won, and what have you, flowing out the door, and unhappy customers and unhappy employees, and all of those kinds of things. We worked with a very large trading company who, honestly, when they came to us, their first problem that they kind of elucidated to us was, look, our people are walking out the door. They're fed up with how we do things. We're asking them to work every single weekend. Our deployments take hours and days and are very stressful to do. And I'll never forget, it's probably one of the coolest things ever with our product is we automated one of their deployments into their environment. And then we did a big demo for all the, the important people. And the deployment took 45 seconds. And there was sort of a look of concern, everybody in the room. And they said, well, when does this start? And we said, no, it's done. We just did it. And all of a sudden, just light bulbs started going off. Like, wait, we can do a deployment in 45 seconds? It doesn't have to take 7.5 hours on my Saturday afternoon. That just was the steamroller effect of, oh my God, it doesn't have to be this bad. We can actually fix this. We can actually work normal hours and still be more productive than we were before. seeing the light go on over people's heads, that was just an awesome experience. Gene, I'm sure you've seen, those kinds of, kind of aha moments when people finally get rolling on these things as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a very important human element when you can actually do deployments in the middle of the day when everyone's in the office versus you start them at midnight on Friday and everybody has to work all weekend, right? I mean, that's been so much of the ops experience, and yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, I think one of the things I just remember very vividly, I was watching a deployment at a large agile planning company, and it was the deployment was scheduled at 3:30, and it just at 4 o'clock they just called it off. It's like certain people had already gone home, and just the plans didn't quite line up, and there was they just said let's not push it, let's try again tomorrow. And it was just and they said no problem. And, so it was low stakes. The fact that you push it 24 hours is just not a big deal, as opposed to, oh my gosh, if we don't make this work, then maybe another month, right? It was just that was like one of the biggest aha moments in my own journey.
Oh yeah, no, I mean we see it all the time, and one of my little catchphrases that I always talk about is that automation is acceleration. You can't help but do things faster once you've automated them. You spend much less time sitting around waiting for command prompts to return and scanning log files and all of that kind of stuff. So get yourself out of the business of typing the wrong command into the wrong xterm window while you do deployments. And the third thing that I want to talk about is self-service deployments. And why is that a separate kind of topic other than automated deployments? Well, here's the thing: you're not always going to be deploying into production. So you want to be able to do deployments for testing, for performance testing, for regression testing, for just developer testing, right? One of the tenets that we try to adhere to, and I know Gene talks about a lot, is make sure that all of your environments that you're deploying into are as close to production as possible, right? Make sure that, now maybe you don't need, 10,000 servers to do it, but you need substantially the same kind of environment that you're deploying into. Well, our point of view very much with our products and when I talk and those kinds of things is, don't have your deployment scripts or your deployment methodology be something that is an afterthought. Think of it as a feature of your product, and do it up front. And if you automate it, then you should also make it self-service so that engineers can do deployments into their environments that they need to do, occasional manual testing or verification or those kinds of things. Or if you have to do a deployment for some load testing, let's say, why should you require the ops people to get involved, right? If you want to do a deployment into some data center or the cloud or something like that, let them worry about the production environments, right? Let them worry about that. And meanwhile, use the self-service automated deployment and even self-service standing up of environments, which I'll talk about in a second, to do that, so that you're not always running around trying to find the priest in the robe who has the magic incantations that he can throw and get the stuff deployed, even if it's automatic, right? Now that requires a number of things to go right. You have to have a system in place that allows you to securely do these things, right? So that if I'm a QA person, I can deploy into the right but not the wrong environments and so on. Very, very important. And I really, I want to stress that, treat your deployments as a feature of your product in some ways, right? We certainly back in the day when we were shipping only desktop software and everything came with an installer, the installer was seen as a feature of the product, right? That was the first experience the end user was going to have with your product. Well, if your deployment doesn't go wrong, or if your deployment goes wrong, your customer isn't going to even experience your product, right? It's not out there. So no value has been delivered in that case. So you need to keep that in mind. And, we worked, across over the years with companies like The Gap and Family Search, and they were very early on the scene with things like agile development, and we're very successful in getting the productivity and throughput of their development organizations up. And the very next thing that they kind of ran into is, great, we've got software ready to go, but in some cases it would take them 90 days to get it into production. So there was there's basically a giant pileup at the deployment tool booth, and they've since obviously solved those problems very well. But you have to think about deployment not just as a into ops, into production issue, right? You're deploying your code all the time. And hopefully when you deploy into production, you're deploying it into production the same way you deployed it into pre-prod, into UAT, into regression testing, and all of those things, so that you've debugged and gotten the kinks out of your deployment process by the time you hit production. One of the best ways to do that is to service deployments as a self-service thing, where I can go pick an environment, pick an application, pick a version, get it deployed there, and then do some automation on top of that, run tests, do whatever it is I need to do with that environment. Very, very important. One of the most interesting things I've seen on sort of interesting deployments is in working with some of our aerospace and defense customers, where they have to do air-gapped deployments. So they're obviously dealing with highly classified environments, those kinds of things, and where we work with them so that they can essentially walk a laptop into a secure environment and connect that laptop to the secure environments, do a deployment, verify that it's correct, disconnect and walk away. And so now they've essentially been able to do an air-gapped, nearly automatic, except for the walking it into the secure facility part, deployment. And that's a big change from the way they used to have to do things, because that was that used to be a 17-day process with 6 engineers. Now it's a one-day process. Somebody walks in with a laptop with the right bits on it and do the deployment. Much less stress, much more fun. Fourth, and a little bit, again, a theme on the automation and self-service, but that's self-service environments. Oftentimes, unless we're working with a very trivial application, we're dealing with complex distributed apps, right? We're dealing with, maybe we're running a containerized microservice application. We've got RDBMSs, we've got messaging, we've got key value stores. We may have legacy applications that we're having to talk to. We may have third-party vendors that we need to integrate with. These things are complex when we get up to scale and get up to solving, real serious, industry problems. And so being able to provision an environment is a very important part of being able to do a deployment. If I can't get a set of VMs or a set of containers stood up that can then receive my application, I have a problem. I can't test it. I'm an engineer and I'm fixing a bug, and yes, I'm going to write unit tests for it and all of those kinds of things, but I probably want to see it work too, especially for something that's serious or intermittent or performance related or something like that. And if I can't get a near production quality environment stood up in a few minutes so that I can then deploy my application into that environment and then do the the load test or the performance test or regression test that I just worked on, that means that my bug fix is going to take, I might have changed 10 lines of code, but if it takes me 3 weeks to requisition a set of VMs that I can then test it on, and then it takes me another day or two to do the deployment onto that and then test it, I'm working a lot slower. So you should also be thinking of not just how do I deploy my app into a pre-existing environment, but how do I stand these environments up in the first place, right? And a lot of us obviously are using, Chef and Puppet and public and private and hybrid VM and container infrastructures to do this. But there's a lot of orchestration that has to happen around that too. So pay attention to that and make sure that your engineers, in particular your QA and development engineers, have easy access to environments and that they're not standing around waiting for access to environments. One very large financial customer that we're working with right now, one of their challenges is they have one environment that they can do pre-production testing in. And they're a fairly agile shop, so they're actually producing functionality pretty rapidly, but then they essentially have a backlog at the testing toll booth where everybody has to line up in queue and wait until somebody's finished with that one kind of snowflake golden environment that they can do testing in. Virtualization, containerization, all of those things help us there, but you need an easy way to stand up the environment and deploy the application into it. So focus on self-service. That's very important to do. We've got a large pharmaceutical customer which had some interesting challenges with this. They worked very closely to be able to enable their engineers to deploy applications into AWS. But one of the challenges they have is they're dealing with, when they do these deployments, not just applications, but data. And clinical data, privacy-related, HIPAA compliance issues, where some applications, depending on the data set that you want it to work with, they're not allowed to deploy for privacy reasons or IP reasons into the public cloud. But they didn't want to have sort of the deployment police kind of walking after everybody like, you walk after the elephant in the parade and make sure that no data got deployed into the public cloud that shouldn't have been. So instead, they set up a self-service infrastructure where you could just, decide what application you wanted, decide the size of environment and type of environment that you wanted to deploy it into, and then what sort of data you wanted to go along with that. And then, of course, depending on the data that you chose, your destination could either be, into the public cloud or only into the firewalled environment. Where that was allowed for privacy reasons. Those are the kinds of things that you can enable, and they can happen a lot faster when you do self-provisioning, and you can have a lot more manageability and governance over those environments when you make them self-service. People end run the system when things get painful. One of the anecdotes actually from that same pharmaceutical company was, when we used to have to requisition hardware for this, the SLA from the IT organizations was 42 days to get hardware provisioned, racked up, and turned on. Well, here's the killer, Gene. They then went to virtualization, and the IT organization kept the same SLA. It took them 42 days to provision, stand up, and turn on VMs. So, talk about not getting the picture. So they actually then had a huge problem with their engineers doing end runs around the system and doing deployments into the public cloud, sometimes with data that they weren't supposed to. Now, that was firewalled and, those kinds of things as well, but it's a real problem. And that was the reason they went down this road of self-service to say, look, if we provide an easy path, a low-resistance path to get the stuff done correctly, people will use it. If we provide a high-resistance, painful path, then they'll sidestep it to get their work done, and then we have to clean up after them, or we have to go, audit and do all those kinds of things. So it's a real problem, and self-service of not just application deployment, but environment provisioning and those kinds of things is very, very important and very powerful. Last, but certainly not least, is security and auditability. Not everybody ought to care about this, right? I mean, security is a huge thing. As we're walking around with our entire lives, stored up in the cloud, our health information, our financial information, security and privacy are massive, massive issues. And I don't think we've seen even the beginning of the problems that we're going to see when it comes to, infrastructures getting hacked and those kinds of things. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, sadly. Maybe I'm a little bit of a curmudgeon on that, Gene. I don't know how you feel, but, certainly I don't think we're good enough yet to where we can, mitigate all of these problems very, very rapidly. And so security and auditability is just a big, big deal. One of the things I always like to say is automation is auditing. Automation is documentation. We worked with one of our aerospace customers, and they used to have, at the tail end of every development iteration, they would have a 2-week process where everybody had to sit down and they had to audit every single check-in, every submission into the SCM system. They had to audit where it got built, how it got tested, and then basically compile that information because that was required as part of their contract for delivering the software. They spent 2 weeks doing that, doing nothing but that. But just by automating their pipeline a little bit, they were able to cut that down to basically hours because 99% of the information needed was in the automation system. It just got scraped as a side effect of doing the automation. And then it was just a question of pulling that information out and getting it into the right format to be consumed. Much less time wasted on that kind of stuff. And Gene, I know you've got a security background, so I'd love to hear your take on that.
Absolutely, I think one way to sum it up is that really you're making sure that no one has access to the production environment except for the deployment automation technologies, and we're relying less on the approval processes, right? We're basically kind of making a decision based on 40 to 60 words that we put into a description field, and moving that into more automated tests. The static code analysis, it's automated testing. All these things actually give us a far higher degree of assurance. Oh, and the fact that the deployment is automated means that all the error-prone nature of manual changes goes away too. So I think one of my favorite stories is like Salesforce. At DevOps Enterprise 2014, they said a huge breakthrough was when the security group said all automated changes to the infrastructure are now going to be considered standard changes, no approvals needed. However, all manual changes will still require approvals, which might take 1 or 2 weeks. So, essentially they're creating a fast, safe path as opposed to, the standard way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I remember one of the things I learned in way back in school was, when it comes to security, security that prevents people from getting their job done or makes it difficult is bad security, because people will end run it. And I think that's a brilliant move on Salesforce's part to say, look, if you're doing it the standard way, automated way, we've got all the information we need. You know, you go ahead, do it. I think that's a great move on their part. So, you know, kind of summing up a little bit, right? I mean, I think all of these things and more. Whoops, I went a little bit too fast. All of these things and more are in the DevOps Handbook, written by our friend Gene and all of his amazing cohorts. So you don't have to trust me. Trust the data. You know, the data in the handbook and in the State of DevOps reports there's a lot of rigorous science behind this stuff, people, and we need to pay attention to it. There's some really cool stories in there, lots of great, you know, anecdotes and case studies and those kinds of things. And I think that, you know, the numbers bear it out, and we've seen it ourselves in our interactions with our customers, with our prospects, and just in the industry in general, that, you know, this stuff is real. The problems are real, but the gains are real too. And the organizations that are able to adopt DevOps and do all the automation and you know, kind of get out of each other's way, get out of your own way, and have the computers do the things that computers are good at, have the humans focus on the things that we're still good at, you know, until Skynet takes over, of course. But, you know, really focus on that, and it's real. I mean, we're seeing it anecdotally. More importantly, we're seeing it in the data, and that's really huge. And I would be remiss, of course, if I don't, you know, plug the DevOps Enterprise Summit Conference. This is the conference for the horses. You know, this is where we talk about, you know, how we're actually doing it, and what are our challenges, and how do we overcome them, and all the experience reports. You know, as Gene was talking about before, it's my favorite conference, and of course I would say that because we run it along with Gene and his crew. But really, honestly, it's a fantastic, great conference. You know, most of the stuff from, if not all the stuff from prior years, are online. On YouTube, the videos and the conference proceedings and all of those kinds of things. So, you know, check it out. It's really cool and fun stuff. And one of the things I really enjoy about it, I don't know about you, Gene, but I really like hearing from people year after year about how they've progressed since 12 months ago. It's really exciting to kind of hear that and see that, yeah, there really is, you know, that thing that we had a problem with last year, not a problem anymore. That's really gratifying to hear.
Absolutely, and thanks for the kind words on the DevOps Handbook. And, you know, one of the things I'm proudest of is the 48 case studies that made it into the book. So I think 10 of them are about the unicorns, but the 38 are about horses. And that almost all of those came out of the DevOps Enterprise Summit. So with that, Anders, let's take some questions.
Yeah, and hopefully, Alan, you'll help us out a little bit here.
Yes, I'm ready. We only have about an hour and a half worth of questions here to fit into 8 minutes, so we'll do the best. Let's get right into it. What top tools would you recommend for creating production-like environments?
You know, one of the things I've used very successfully recently, after saying for year after year it's not a good year, is Docker. It's just, oh my gosh, there's a certain category of problems where I just never want to deal with again, where, you know, you can't reproduce the pushable state, you can't reproduce the environment that can actually push into production. You know, it's seriously, life is too short for that, and it is I mean, it is a game changer for anyone who has to, you know, write and run code in an environment that's not their laptop.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's been you know, in some ways it's been the year for containers in the last year, so it's going to be exciting to see how that, you know, evolves going forward. I think one of the most interesting things that I've seen, and obviously, you know, there's Chef, there's Puppet, you know, Electric Flow can obviously help with these things, and we integrate with Chef and Puppet to make those kinds of things happen. But I think one of the most interesting ideas I've kind of seen put into action is the idea of immutable environments, that once you stand up an environment, you no longer mess with it. And that sort of takes away your ability to cheat. And in fact, you know, there's one customer that we worked with where what they basically do is once they have an environment provisioned and applications deployed into there, they throw away the keys. They destroy the credentials to log back into those environments. If there's a problem with those environments, they get recreated from scratch. And so they've had to, and obviously they automate the creation of those environments. So I think, a lot of times when we have issues in productions or even issues in production or issues in testing, it's very tempting to say, oh, I know exactly what the problem is. I'm just going to SSH into that machine and change the conf file and problem solved, right? But problem not solved, right? Now you've got a snowflake environment, and you may be the only one that knows what happened to that environment to make it work. So I think the idea of immutable environments is a pretty powerful thing. That forces you then to think about automatically provisioning your environments, and there's a lot of great tools out there for doing that.
Sure.
And
Anders, if
don't you have an
mind.
announcement about Docker and microservices, Anders?
Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're in our current shipping product today, we've got support now for doing microservices and containerized deployments. Not just and into all of the Kubernetes and Google Container Engine and all of those various types of things, but also kind of an important thing I think for a lot of people is that we support that as a hybrid deployment. So you may have an application that isn't 100% containerized, that isn't 100% microserviceized, if that's the word. I guess it is now. And so you've got some legacy applications, you've got some existing monolith or mainframe or third-party or vendor type systems that you need to work with, and at the same time do containerized or kind of new generation architecture deployments. And so it's kind of fun to work on those kinds of things where you get to solve the hybrid problems, because those to me are the really interesting ones as you kind of transition from one technology to another.
Sure. And I think, guys, just as we saw with hybrid and cloud, we're going to see hybrid in containers as well. And Anders, as you hit this, something Electric Cloud is doing with Electric Flow is allowing this transition zone, this transition period, as we are in this hybrid era. Let's turn back to a little bit about security, one of mine and Gene's favorite. And how about automating security testing and performance testing to achieve automation? Do we have any best practices on that that you guys would like to mention or talk about? Gene, I know you keep your hand in here.
Oh my goodness! I mean, our friend Gary Groover had something just one of the more profound things I've ever heard about in this space is, without automated testing, software development is an fundamentally unscalable business model, because it means the more code you have, the more expensive it is to test. And when I heard that, I mean, it was just indisputably true. So, it's a big topic, and we actually address it in almost the entirety of the practices of flow section in the DevOps Handbook, and we have case studies about the HP LaserJet firmware project, Bazaar Voice, the Google Web Services. So many of them, and I think that provides both the practices and the principles as well as specific case studies.
Good. I'm trying to save and condense stuff here because we're running out of time. There were a number of questions around DevOps and IDLE. And Gene, I know working with the Axelos folks and who responsible for IDLE, they're bringing it together. They're updating IDLE, but people are writing here, is it compatible? What do you think? Gene, I'm going to let you address it conclusively.
Yeah, I think one of the great presentations at DevOps Enterprise 2016 was by Kaimar Karu from Axelos, and so this is the organization that's responsible for the custodians of ITIL these days, and he described the top 10 ITIL principles, and it really is one of the things that really caught my attention was like number 7, minimum viable process, minimum viable reporting. And number 1 was actually, it's all about customer orientation around the customer and flow. And I think that really, in my mind, just shows decisively that they are compatible. And there is an interpretation of ITIL that we're going to achieve all the DevOps-y like things, even from the lens of ITIL.
I think there's more to come with that as well, as we'll see, maybe at DES London. Next, how do we deal with organizations who use automation for downstream environments, QA, SIT unit test, but chicken out, if you will, around and still continually do manual deployments to production? So, back to that polling question, maybe, they're somewhere on the scale of it's, they're scared to death of an automated actual push.
Yeah, I think you have to dig in a little bit and kind of figure out what is the concern. Where is the pain point? Where is the fear? Is there a history of deployment failures? Is there a history of long downtimes and those kinds of things? And really just kind of focus on. I mean, it's very simple to say, but it is obviously difficult to implement. But if it hurts, do it more often. The larger your batch sizes are going to be, and if you're doing manual deployments, your batch sizes are going to be larger. There's just no, you're just not going to be able to go fast enough to prevent the work from piling up behind you. When you do a large batch deployment, there are more things that can go wrong. And when something does go wrong, it will take you longer to figure it out. The only way to get better at this is to do it more frequently in smaller batches. I mean, I would recommend maybe if you really have existential fear about it, start doing a shadow deployment on the side automatically, right? So let's say that you still deploy manually into production, but on the side you have a little side production environment, that not online necessarily, but do an automatic deployment into that, and then do a comparison between the two and see which one, see what the problems are in the automation that maybe you're not addressing. See what the differences are when you're done. You may be pleasantly surprised, and after a few times you notice, hey, the automation really is taking care of this. You get a little bit more confidence and kind of go on there. So I guess kind of behavior modification training, if you will. If you're afraid of flying, then learn more about airplanes. If you're afraid of deployments, learn more about deployments, do them more frequently, automate them, those kinds of things, and run it side by side if you have to get the comfort level up. It is a scary thing to do, that's for sure.
Understood. Guys, we're 1 minute after the top of the hour, and we're religious here about letting people get back to work. We have a ton more questions. The good news is we have a written record of all of them. Gene, Anders, if it's okay, will get you the written record of these questions, and maybe at your leisure or not at your leisure, we can get some answers out to these people, and we'll post it along with the recording of this webinar on either DevOps.com or on our DevOps TV YouTube channel. There are quite a number of others. Guys, thank you so much for one of the best webinars we've ever had here at DevOps.com, but truthfully, I expected no less from the two of you. Thank you. Thank you to at one point, I think we had almost 700 people logged on here live and close to 2,000 people registered. So thank you all for joining with us. Thanks for the great questions. It really, DevOps does take a village. We will see you on another GoToWebinar, DevOps webinar from DevOps.com soon. Hopefully we'll see many of you in London at DevOps Enterprise Summit. And I believe the dates there are June 4th and 5th, Gene, is that correct?
Yeah, I'd have to check the slide. Yep, there we go.
June 5th and 6th.
Thank you so much,
I was wrong.
And Anders. It was a genuine pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, likewise.
Anders, as always, fantastic. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you on another webinar soon.
Are we back?